everybody. Welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. How are you, everybody? Okay, first and foremost, I'm going to apologize for my voice a little bit here this morning. I have been wrestling with a weird fall bug. It's not COVID. It's just been a weird bug. So I've had this weird voice going on, and I finally have enough here to get rolling. So again, I kind of have that low Brenda Vaccaro sexy voice. Welcome to InPsightRadio. I'm Danielle Egnew. Oh my God. Anyway, man, we're in October. Can you believe where the heck did 2021 go, gang? Where did it go? I mean, my end of my summer and the early part of my summer going into fall were full of media projects. I was super busy. And here I am trying to get over this weird, hello, very good to talk to you today, kind of chest and throat thing. And, you know, I'm looking at how thin our ethers are this year, and it is blowing my mind. Now, you know, every year in October, I talk about how these ethers get thinner and thinner, literally every year as we wear on into the fall. Now, this is a true story, and people always ask me, well, how can that be? I thought that Halloween was just a weird, myth and something people did because they didn't understand science and blah. Actually, gang, people in the old days understood science a lot better than we do. And I don't mean science. I don't mean quantum physics. I mean science of the metaphysical. Okay, there was a lot back in the old days that people really focused on. I mean, they focused on a lot of metaphysical attributes, and we blow them off today because we do have things like quantum physics, and we understand the world in a much more acute way than we used to, right? So I would tell you that it's so interesting as we get into October here, because October is full of really incredible thin ethers. And it has to do with how our planet is aligned in the solar system. I mean, if you're in the northern hemisphere right now, especially if you are, clumped together. Well, really, it doesn't matter. If you're in the northern hemisphere, I was going to say, if you're clumped together on the side of the planet, on either side of the Atlantic, but really it doesn't matter. It's really a northern hemisphere thing. Then you are going to be experiencing more thin ethers because of the way that the planet is tilted and our proximity towards the sun. Now, and also with the gravitational pull of all the other planets on the Earth, this is what creates an ether structure. You have to remember, gang, that when we're talking multiverses, when we're talking ethers in Halloween, what we're really talking is we're talking electromagnetic fabric that separates all kinds of dimensions, all right? So in the fall, especially in our Celtic regions, if we look to Ireland and Scotland and England, and we follow the longitude of that all the way around the planet, then what we're going to find is we're going to be finding some really incredible open vortex points. So there are sweet spots in the northern part of the United States that become even a little more haunted, if you will, than maybe even in the southern parts of the United States during this time of the year. This is why New England just lights up like a Christmas tree. That and the fact that the whole New England area, when you're looking at it, it's really, it's based, the whole New England area sits atop very iron-based granite, as well as limestone caverns, okay? So, and both of those things are huge conductors of vortex energy, electromagnetic energy, which of course create vortexes, right? So, I don't want to spend the whole podcast explaining vortex dimensional physics because that gets boring. Although maybe I did it in this voice, if I could do it in this voice. So what happens is you have these very intense pulls in the fabric of space-time, don't you know? And when the intense pulls happen, it opens up a vortex. Dang, I should have made a career off of being sick. That would have worked out. Anyway, so what we're looking at here is we're looking at October, And we're looking at all of our ethers thinning and opening up. I want you to think of all of the apertures, like a camera aperture, as the Earth's electromagnetic field is pulled and stretched in a certain way, like a fishnet being stretched open and all the diamonds in the fishnet just open wide. That's what happens along particular longitudinal areas of the globe during October. And it has to do with, again, where we are at in the solar system, proximity to the sun, proximity with other planets. And when those doorways open, we have spirit life that comes through. Now, every year that goes by, gang, and I know I'm going to go back to the physics thing, but I'm not going to talk in this voice because I feel like, you know what I feel like in that voice? Oh my God, it just hit me. Literally, okay, see if this brings back any memories, all right? Chakotay, get us on a course for the Delta Quadrant. 7 of 9, open up a hailing frequency. Did you ever watch Star Trek Voyager? I feel like Catherine Janeway today. Anyway, I digress. Well, it's hard. It's hard when you're a soprano and you've had no voice for a while, and then when you get it, you don't sound like you. I've got me pumping through into earphones right now, and I'm like, who is this sexy lady? She's freaking me out, man. All right. Anyway, oh my gosh, I got my peeps waving at me going, would you please get back on the subject? This podcast is only an hour long. When we are in this planetary alignment, we see more ghosts. We see more spirits. When it is October, our ether's thin. Now, every year that goes by, we lose a little teensy weensy, eensy, skeensy, beansy bit of our gravitational field as a planet. That's true. I mean, if you, and the gravitational field it's really in line with the magnetic field. We lose a little bit of the magnetism on the planet, which just in eensy beensies adds to the gravity because you have to have an atmosphere to have the gravity, right? So we lose our magnetic poles just the tiniest bit every year. Now, there's a huge reason to that, but again, we don't have enough time. So if you go up to the North Pole or the South Pole, the electromagnetic field or the gravitational field, the atmospheric field is just the skinsiest bit more dense than down by the equator, okay? And actually, our brains work better in higher electromagnetic or higher magnetic or not too high, but our brains work better with a little bit more of that electromagnetic/gravitational energy. So it's interesting that we're losing that just skeensy bits at a time every single year. And really, it's a friction thing. You know, our planet just continues to spin and spin and spin in space. Now, space is a vacuum, yet it's not it's not like there's nothing in space. There's all kinds of particles. And even though it's a vacuum, those particles over time begin to drag on the atmosphere of the Earth. Now, because it is a vacuum and those particles are very scarce, really, we're talking about a drag that takes billions of years to erode the atmosphere off the Earth. But this is, in essence, what happened with Mars, gang. You know, when I talk with all of our off-world cousins out there, all of our ET friends, they tell me all the time that Mars used to look a heck of a lot like Earth. It was almost just like Earth. Bigger water sources, huge land masses that were just very fertile. And over time, because of where Mars is located, it's in a different, I guess, Goldilocks zone because of its size and its weight, and it's bigger than Earth, obviously. And over time, it lost its atmosphere. And once your atmosphere gets thin enough, space just sucks it off. That's what they showed me. It's not like it gets so thin and it just gradually wears out and everybody has time to wander around in oxygen masks on the planet. I mean, what they showed me is once the atmosphere erodes enough, then basically the vacuum of space wins out and just sucks the rest of the atmosphere off the planet. Once the electromagnetic pull of the planet can't keep up with the eroded, force field of atmosphere, like we have the ionosphere and the magnetosphere and all these things, which are created by our spinning planet. And eventually, if that spinning is just ground to a halt enough. Now, I don't mean stopping, but there is apparently a ratio of spin versus proximity to the sun, which, by the way, all of our planets are constantly being pulled away from the sun. That's because the universe is constantly expanding. And it may be by, nano, micro, teensy meters a year. But eventually, if you give our planet enough time, you give it enough billions of years, we're going to spin off our atmosphere and we're going to be pulled far enough away from our sun that we're going to look like Mars. We will lose our atmosphere and everything's going to get sucked into space. Now, if that's not scary during October, I just don't know what is. But back to our ether structure. My whole team is looking at me today like, are you high on cold medicine? What is wrong with you? Stay on the topic. You guys, I am on the topic, okay? We're just taking some scenic routes here. So I am not high on cold medicine, by the way. I've had a cup of coffee. That is all. So the thing that we're looking at here is that the ether structure of the Earth, it expands during this time of year, okay? So now that we kind of have a generalized idea of how the physics on the Earth work in comparison to our vortex systems and our atmosphere and all the other things, I would like to report that, of course, this is why, you guys, I brought up the eroding atmosphere. Every single year that we pass by, our ether structure becomes slightly thinner. Now, when I was a kid, I'm 52 years old. So when I was a kid, I didn't really notice the thin ethers all that much. And I'm not sure if it's because my spiritual and psychic abilities had not developed as much yet, or the fact that I was a kid and I was much more interested in trading Star Wars figures, or what the deal was. However, I think really what the deal was that the ethers really had not eroded to the point where I could start to really track it. And I think it was a little bit of all of those things that would allow me to track this really phenomenal and interesting, I guess I'd say ether thinning phenom, okay? So now, though, every year I really feel these ethers thin out, and they thin out. Halloween, October 31st, just happens to be the time when the end of October, when they get the most thin. And they start really ultra thinning into October and then have a thickening up process, if you will, that's much faster afterwards. And I'm not really exactly sure why that is, except for the fact that I think the stretchy point, we come into the apex of the stretchy point of those ethers, like think of that fishnet being stretched in many different directions. We come into that stretchy point in those ethers in October. So as we're rolling in, last year, I started feeling the ethers thin about, 10 days out from October. This year, man, it was right at the top of the month. Right at the top of the month, I'm feeling these ethers thinning, and I'm thinking to myself, what is going on here? This is crazy. We've already got ethers thinning, and I can tell in my house. Okay, here's how you can tell the ethers start to thin sooner. If you have a home or a place of work or a place that you reside a lot of the day, and it's close to a ley line or it's close to underground water sources or on a ley line, chances are that there are going to be vortexes either in the house or around the house or workplace. Now, one of the ways that you can tell that our ethers are thinning in a more pronounced way is that all of a sudden our ether structure starts to stretch open. Okay, it starts to stretch open. And when those ethers stretch open, little critters come through. Now, these critters are spiritual, and they could be our elemental friends. They could be interdimensional friends. They could be our ghosty friends, which technically are interdimensionals because they're from a different dimension. Once we die, we go to the heaven dimension. But you know what I mean. Could be ghosts, could be inhumans, it could be anything. And so you start noticing a lot more of this little pranky behavior from a lot of these beings. At least I notice it. I notice a lot more of this pranky behavior with these beings. And one of the things I notice so acutely is that they're just little turds. And a lot of this behavior are elemental beings, and they're coming through these ether structures because it's easier for them. But a lot of them are spirits, human spirits, former human spirits, and some inhumans that just think it's funny to mess with humanity. What is an inhuman? Well, we've got some low-grade bored demons. We've got kind of some low-rent interdimensionals that can masquerade as demons that come from other multiverses, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm not trying to freak everybody out, but there are little, buttheads that run around in different dimensions and just like to F with us because it's funny. And we are funny. I mean, we react like a bunch of little guinea pigs in a cage when you go by and you shoot off a cap gun. I mean, humans just jump and we squeal like little piggies. I mean, we're ridiculous when we're scared. So if you're a being that thinks that's funny, you're going to come by on Halloween and be like, oh, this is excellent. These guys are ridiculous. This is fabulous. So that's what we end up seeing a lot of, okay, this time of year. Now, what I think is so interesting here is that when these ether structures open up, you can actually physically hear the spirits wandering around. Now, in my house, we live in this early 1900s lath and plaster home. And lath and plaster homes are tremendous to keep out a lot of modern day EMF because they have iron grids that are in the walls, iron webs basically, that hold a lot of them that hold the slats together. That it holds the wooden slats together. Sometimes those wooden slats are nailed, but there came a time when the nails became more expensive than just grabbing wire and making these meshes of slats made of wood and then rolling the meshes out like a fence in between the wall and then covering that in plaster. So our home happens to have that type of lath and plaster architecture where you have those wires that just stretch all the way around the wooden slats in the walls. Now, when you have iron wire from back in the day, okay, because you got to remember they weren't using stainless steel back then. When you have all that heavy metal in your walls, it creates what's called a Faraday cage. And if you follow any paranormal television, or you follow any Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or you follow any supernatural episodes, you're going to run into the concept of the Faraday cage. So what is a Faraday cage? Well, a Faraday cage was, of course, developed by a guy named Faraday. And it is a wire mesh cage that when you are inside, protects whatever is inside from the effects of the outside. And we're talking electromagnetic effects. And Faraday cages were used quite a bit in code rooms during World War I and II, mostly during World War II. So they would wrap the code rooms in wire, and then the actual coding instruments were run through hardwired units that were encased in special coatings that could not be tapped and decoded. Especially into the 60s when we started having more of that EMF type broadcast spyware. So if you live in a Faraday cage, which I do, which I love, by the way, it cuts out a lot of the grossness, the, I guess, white noise of our cell phones, our cell towers. Some of our, I guess, satellite stuff gets through it. However, because satellites are up top, right? And you usually don't have wire mesh running in your ceiling. Sometimes you do with these old homes. Ours does. We've got a cove ceiling, so we've got the lath and plaster up top because they plastered the ceilings. So literally, I live in a Faraday cage except for my windows, which I love. This is why I love old homes. I go into my house and I'm like, oh, it's really peaceful in here. Now, the bad side of living in a Faraday cage is your cell service can be splotchy in your house, and your Wi-Fi is not going to reach around corners very well. So you have to get Wi-Fi boosters because the walls are going to cut that Bluetooth signal. We don't have any Wi-Fi boosters in our house because I don't like them. Neither does my wife. How much to the dismay of our child. However, there's rooms in the house where you can sit and watch TV and everything's good. So if you're living in a Faraday cage and it's Halloween time, then you're probably going to be protected somewhat from the ghosts and ghoulies and creepers that are scooting through the open vortex system in this time frame, okay? However, if you have any openings in your home, which considering you live in an iron cage, and iron is also an electromagnetic conductor. So if you have any vortexes in your house, the Faraday cage will help keep those open from the inside. All right. So if you have any of those in an older home, which we have a couple, then whatever creeps through there is going to mess with your pets. Watch this phenomenon. We've got 3 dogs. We have a Pomeranian, a mini American Eskimo, and then we've got a half Pom, half mini American Eskimo. And they're all brothers. It's weird. So we've got these dogs, and the dogs are really accustomed to humans because I'm around them constantly. I'm around them all day. I work at home, in essence. I used to have an office that I went out to do readings within, and when COVID hit, I shut down the office. And so mostly I'm working at home unless I'm out shooting or on location or on a special event or something like that. So I'm with my dogs all the time. And they're not weird about people coming up and petting them. So I always can tell when our ethers are getting thinner. Not only do I start to feel more things in the house and see more things in the house, which generally I don't because I shoo those things out like crazy. I'm hyper vigilant about saying, hey, I don't care that you're here, but please don't hang out in my home. You can't be here. You got to go. So during this time of year, however, man, I mean, it's like trying to hold back an ocean wave. Just forget about it. Just, make sure that you dive under the wave or, turn your back to the wave and sink down so it goes over the top of your head, something. Don't get hit in the face with the wave. There's nothing we can do when we live on a giant spinning electromagnet when the ethers open up. You've got these practitioners online. Oh, God, don't get me started on this. Do not. That are claiming that they have the power to close vortexes and this and that. Well, they might have the power to change the ether structure around the vortex or to put up an inhospitable wall of energy for a minute. However, we're a little bitty person on a giant spinning electromagnet, you guys. So when you hear about these people, pay me $20,000 and I'll go to your house and close all the vortexes. Permanently. Well, you can do it for a minute, but they're not going to stay closed. You can change the ether structure in the house so that creepy crawlies don't want to be there. They don't want to go through that doorway because the vibration's too high in the space. Yet it's up to the people living there to maintain that space. So there's really not a lot you can do this time of year, especially. So I'm sitting in my bedroom and I'm watching one of my dogs who's a little hitchy. One of our dogs is a rescue from a pet store. And it was a wonderful pet store. It wasn't that the pet store was mistreating the dog. It was that the dog had been there for 6 months because it was a papered Pomeranian. However, it didn't look exactly like a Pomeranian. And I saw this dog when it was little bitty. It was one of the Christmas puppies, right? And it was a weird looking dog. Like its nose was too big. It kind of had a funny overbite. It had huge ears. It did not look like a Pom. It looked like a space creature. And I remember I wanted to see the dog just because I like to look at puppies. And I'm good friends with the pet store owner. So I asked the pet store owner, can you hold that Pom up? And she held him up as a baby puppy. And I looked at this thing. And I mean, I love baby animals, you guys. I'm all about baby animals. Except in this particular instance, this poor little thing was so weird looking. Like this just flew out my mouth. I felt so bad because animals know, you guys. They know if you think they're ugly or cute, or they can tell. And it flew out my mouth and I just went, oh. I mean, it was supposed to be a Pomeranian puppy. And if you've ever seen a Pomeranian puppy, they look like little Ewoks. I mean, they're super cute. I don't even care if you don't like Pomeranians. You look at the puppy and you're like, oh my God, that doesn't even look like a dog. That looks like a Jim Henson creation. That thing is amazing. So this poor little baby, it just flew out my mouth. He looked like a gremlin. He looked like a bat and a Pom and some other weird space creature had a baby. It just wasn't even right. And the poor thing looked confused and just weirded out. And I was just like, oh no. So 6 months later, I go back to this same pet store and I'm buying food. And I had a really horrible habit of going into this pet store to buy dog food and coming home with a dog, right? So my wife was very, shall we say, she punctuated the fact that she just really wanted me to get dog food at the store, not dog food and a purebred dog. So I walk in, and I'm just a sucker for cute furry things, gang. And I'm a huge fan of rescues. Believe me, I am. When these babies are like, hi, I love you, I go nuts. You know how like some women have really weird freakouts over babies? I never had that over babies. I mean, human babies are cute. They're really sweet. But fur babies, oh my God, I lose my freaking mind. I just lose it. It's not okay. So I go to the pet store to get some food. I'm buying the food, and I say to my friend, because they don't have Pomeranians up on the marquee anymore as an option for puppies. They have some other breeds. And I say to my friend, thank God you don't have any Pomeranians. I can just buy food. And she freaks out. And she's like, no, we do. We have one. And I said, well, and she's like sprinting to the puppy pen because she knows I'm a sucker. Okay. And I'm just like, well, but it doesn't say, I mean, the last one you had was that Christmas puppy thing at I couldn't even call it a Pomeranian. It was so weird. She's like, we still have him. And my heart just broke. I'm like, oh no, that weird dog. Nobody ever bought it because it didn't look like a pom. It was just a strange dog. Well, I go and look, and now he's grown into his nose. He's grown into his ears. He's gorgeous. He looks like somebody, like a perfect split between a mini American Eskimo and a Pomeranian. He is beautiful, and he's got all these pretty markings and blue eyes, and I'm like, oh my God. And this dog, by God, this dog remembered me, and he got really excited. And I thought, oh no, don't remember me. I was the asshat who was like, you don't look like a Pomeranian. There's got to be better experiences in your puppyhood than me, man. And I mean, I felt so terrible, but he was gorgeous. So he's 6 months old. So she picks him up and she gives him to me, and he's like, here. And I'm thinking, please don't give me this dog. And this dog is so sweet, and it's so excited to be picked up. And it's been in a puppy pen for 6 months, right? And I'm just like, oh my God, this is not okay. This is not okay. So the lady who owns a pet store takes a picture of me and the dog and texts it to my wife. And I get back this picture text from my wife. I get back a message from the picture text. And it says in all capital letters, there's no punctuation. No effing way. That thing is more neurotic than Angelo, which is our mini American Eskimo, who's really high strung. Get out now. That's what this text says. And I'm reading this text. And my friend who owns the pet store says, what did she say? And I turned the phone over so she couldn't see the text. I said, well, she said she's going to think about it. So I go home just not even thinking about this dog. Because I'm like, there's no way. This poor dog. I mean, I can feel this poor. And I loved the doggy. I wanted to take the doggy home right then. Yet the house we're in, we're renting this house. And so this house that we're in, we can only have 2 dogs. And I just kind of, and my heart's broken over this dog. But I dismissed the dog story. And I'm like, you know what? Don't worry about it. We can't have the dog anyway. I tell my wife, the hard ass, the Scott Taurus hard ass. I tell my wife the story of the dog, that he's been there for 6 months. And, oh, well, it's too bad we can't have 3 dogs. She falls apart. And the end of the story is contacts the management company, goes and buys the dog. We have 3 dogs. So this dog's name is Sebastian, and he is an amazing baby dog. And the breeder that owns the Pomeranians also owns the mini American Eskimos. And obviously somebody got together for a hootenanny. And as we know, dogs can get pregnant from more than one dad. So this dog ended up getting knocked up. So we've got Sebastian. Well, what's this story got to do with anything? Well, Sebastian, being half Pom and half mini American Eskimo, who I love this dog, he's such a baby, is completely and totally way wired for energies. This poor thing is so hypersensitive. Plus, he grew up in a puppy pen for the first 6 months of his life. So who do these spirits fart with when they come through our ethers? Who do they mess with? Sebastian. Because Sebastian is kind of skittish, all right? Again, 6 months, puppy pen. Didn't even know what grass was. First time I took him outside, he slunk around like a cat with rocking chairs swinging over the top of its head. The poor thing was just like, oh my God, which I'm really glad he's with us because we just love on him and now he's a happy baby. But they mess with Sebastian because why? Why do inhumans do that? Why do elementals do that? Why do things from the other day? Remember, gang, if you're going to have creepers that come through your ethers, they're going to be trick. They're going to trick on the things that react to them the most. So here I'm sitting in my bedroom, back to the present, and Sebastian's sitting in the doorway, and he's weird about coming in the doorway sometimes, or coming in the house. He's just a little weird sometimes. So he's sitting there, and I'm like, come on, Sebastian, come on. And this thing, and I can see the thing because, I'm wired for that. And it's about 18 inches tall. It's gray. It's got this wide mouth, like if you carved a jack-o'-lantern. It's got really pointy little teeth and wide-set eyes and kind of a roundy, bald head. There's no hair on this thing. It looks like a hairless cat. Big, wide, round eyes that are kind of orangey colored. It's got two little fingers out front and a thumb, and the fingers have little claw things on them. And they have 4 knuckle joints, which is creepy. That's just creepy as hell, man. It looks like freaking spider fingers. It's gross. Anyway, I'm sure it looks at me and is like, ew, look at those 5 stumpy fingers. There's those 4 stumpy fingers and a thumb. And they've only got like 3 joints in them. Ugly. Ugh. Look like little pig fingers. Anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this thing, and it comes up behind my dog, and it takes one of its little fingers, and it's got the same kind of toes, by the way, little spindly legs, little pot belly. And it doesn't really have a tail as much of, like, if you could imagine how human beings are born with, quote, tails, like their tailbone just kind of hooks just a little bit. That's what this looks like. And these are elementals in this part of the world. These are the elementals that live up in Bighorn Canyon. These are the elementals that occupy Crow Country. And most of the time, they kind of leave our house alone because we're in the city and they don't like that environment. But this thing is standing right behind my dog. And it's got one of its creepy little 4-jointed finger things, and it just reaches up and curls its little index finger around and gingerly just starts flicking the hair on the back of Sebastian's butt. I'm watching this, right? So Sebastian's super sensitive to energy. He's such a sensitive baby. He's really, really smart, too. He's not stupid. And so this thing is flicking his tail, and he spins around and he huffs at it. Sebastian's a huffer. He'll bark at you if you come in the house. He's a little nervous around people sometimes till he gets to know you. So he huffs. Huff, huff, huff. And this thing starts to reach for his face, and he backs right up. Just scoot, 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 scoot. And he sits, and his head cocks to the side. Huff, 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 huff. And he looks at me and looks back at this thing. Like, I know you can see this freaking thing. What the hell is this? And what's it doing picking my butt? I hate this thing. And I think it's kind of funny, right? I guess just a terrible human being, because of course this thing is going for the skittery dog. Now, I'm not going to let the thing hurt my dog, but the thing is looking at me like it doesn't even give a crap I'm even there. It just looks at me like you are irrelevant in all space-time, and then looks back at the dog. And that's kind of my relationship with elementals. They kind of look at me like, I don't care about you. You'll be dead in 5 minutes, according to my timeline. And because I live to be zillions of years old, and you're just a weird flea on the face of my earth. So it's looking at this dog, and they tend to like animals more. And quite honestly, if it's picking on Sebastian, it likes Sebastian. Because elementals will not pay attention to something that they don't like. They just dismiss it, like me. I just get dismissed. So this thing is looking at Sebastian, and it squats down. Like if you can imagine squatting down and putting your elbows on your knees, right? It squats down, and then it puts its little hand out, and it kind of gestures at the dog, like come here. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm kind of, I'm watching its intentions. I'm watching its energy field. I'm like, you hurt my dog, and I will find you, you little pencil-necked weirdo. So it realizes I'm watching it, and it's not going to hurt the dog. But he's kind of, gesturing forward, and Sebastian is huffing at it. So Sebastian kind of puts his little ears back, and he puts his little nose forward, and he's just like, okay, well, I'm going to And so this thing is just sitting there, and he starts to sniff the thing, and it's being really still. And I'm like, you're an asshat thing. This is going to be a jump scare. I can see this jump scare from a mile away, but I'm just sitting here because apparently I'm also an asshat and allowing this thing to freak my dog out. So I'm sitting here watching this, and it just, and Sebastian's sniffing it, and his little tail just kind of starts to wag. And I'm like, oh, and I even say, I'm like, Sebastian, you might want to back up, buddy. And he looks at me, and he's sniffing, and he's huffing, and he's sniffing. And this thing just waits and waits and waits. And then, pow, jumps up off the floor and he doesn't really make any noise. I think it's a he. Doesn't really make any noise, just gestures in this really like jazz hands, right? Jazz hands and jazz feet. Huzzah! Literally, he gives Sebastian the huzzah. Sebastian scrambles, jumps up straight in the air, we have hardwood floors, right? It's an old house. Scrambling backwards. And the poor thing just shoots under the bed and then proceeds to muffle bark. Underneath the bed. So it's way under some boxes. I don't know where the hell Sebastian went. He's in the recess of hell under the bed. Well, this thing just looks at me with its weird gapy teeth and turns around and walks away. And so I run into the hall just as I'm seeing it. It's just strolling up my hall, just naked as a jaybird with its funny little butt. And I get into the hallway and I yell down the hallway. I said, "Don't mess with my dog again, okay? Please. That was not cool." And I can tell its energy. And its energy, elementals don't really speak in the same way we do. But it shot me this energy that was like, "What are you bitching about? You thought it was funny, whatever." And just turned into my kitchen and walked off. Like, I'm a bad dog owner. Oh my God. But I mean, it was kind of funny. And I knew that the little guy wasn't going to hurt Sebastian. But that's what I'm telling you. These things that come through, trick or treat, right? These things that come through, they mess with things that can be messed with. Kids, animals, scaredy pants adults, the whole thing. Now, I do have a rule in my house. If anything dark or weird comes in here, it gets its butt kicked right out. That's just the way it is. It has a right to exist. I'm not here to annihilate it. It just doesn't get to exist in my space. And generally, we keep the ethers in my house. Those ethers are so light that honestly, it's actually inhospitable for a lot of these creepy critters. They don't want to be in here. So anyway, when you're dealing with what we're dealing with here with these thin ether structures, there are ways you can tell if there's little creepers in your house. Now, you have to remember, most of these creepers are not bad creepers. There are sometimes bad creepers. Most of them are just bored and were funny to scare. So if you think back to the origins of Halloween for a minute, this really begins to make a lot more sense, okay? Now, you have to remember, gang, that Halloween is not an American holiday. This came over the pond. This was developed by the Celts around 2,000 years ago, and it was a holiday called Samhain. And it's spelled really oddly. It's Gaelic, so it's spelled Samhain. And so if you hear people talking about, "Hey, happy Samhain," they mean Samhain. And obviously, if you're looking at Gaelic, it doesn't make a lot of sense to the Western ear at all. However, around 2,000 years ago is when this whooped up. And it was really mostly in the area that we think of as Ireland, okay? And that, again, we were talking about the longitudinal areas of Ireland, Scotland, England. So we're talking Ireland, Scotland, England, northern France. And they celebrated their new year back then, Samhain, on November 1st, okay? And this day it was the end of summertime and, of course, the harvest, and it was the beginning of a super cold winter. So everything that they associated with the dying off of the crops and the winter coming, they associated it with human death, right? So the Celts are super cool because they believed that on the night before that new year, that Samhain New Year, they believed that the boundary between the living world and the dead world, these ethers we're talking about, they believed that they thinned. And now we know from science that they do thin, and we know why they thin. So these guys were onto something 2,000 years ago, okay? And they really believed that this blurred the two worlds, which it really does. I mean, I just told this whole story of an elemental, which normally would never be in my house because it's a house. That's really not their jam. They'll be in your house if you disturb the ground and you disturb their mojo and you're building something new and they're mad about it. But this house has been here for a long time, so it's not usual for them to appear, but that veil is blurred. So here they are. And so on the night of course, October 31st, if we go back to the Celts way back in the day, 2,000 years ago, with bonfires and misty bogs, go with me here, they celebrated this Samhain. And it was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to earth through these thin veils, all right? So obviously the Celts thought that the ghosts were going to wreak havoc, pick on people, damage crops, do all the things. And they wanted to not have that happen, so they would make sacrifices through bonfires to these entities. But the biggest part of Samhain back then, gang, was that the Druids of that time believed, because there were these thin ethers, that they could see the future. All right, so Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, which we'll get to how it even got that name, when it first started, this was not about trick-or-treating. It wasn't about tricks. They did think that the spirits were going to be tricky coming through those thin ether barriers, right? They thought they'd be tricky. Yet they didn't really believe that they could ward off these things by spooky masks. What they would do is they would dress up in animal heads and skins of animals, and they'd stand around the bonfire because they believed the thin ethers gave them the power to see the future. So, Samhain, I almost said Sam Hain, God. Hi, I'm an American. Sam Hain. Woo, we-yaw. Samhain was a time of seeing the future. It was a very mystical time. Okay. So what they would do is they'd get around and they'd burn their crops and their animals, and they'd sacrifice to the Celtic deities, of course, because the ethers were thin and they didn't want the mischief upon them. But they wore their animal skin costumes, and they attempted to tell each other's fortunes around all of this, which a lot of times they got right, because the Druids knew a thing or two about a thing or two, people. We have divorced ourselves from the natural energies of our world, which is really sad. But had we not done that, honestly, we'd still be cooking with gas. So basically, when they get done with these big celebrations, they would take a little bit of this big bonfire, and they would go light the fires in their own homes, which had, of course, burned out while they were around, the campfire, giant, huge 2-story campfire. And they believed that they would take that protection into their own home, and it would protect them during the winter. And they would just keep that fire rolling, kind of like the Olympic torch, right? The goal was to keep it rolling the whole winter and not let it burn out, because you took the flame from Samhain and the power of the dead and the power of the future into your home and had it burn all the time. So this really was a religious holiday for the Druids and the Celtic ancient earth religions at that time. And then it kind of got all muddied up, right? As Christianity kind of flooded in. And so we go forward 2,043 years to 43 AD. And you got the Roman Empire that was conquering everything. And it really did conquer a majority of the Celtic territory during that time. And over the course of the 400 years that they stomped out a lot of Celtic tradition, they also folded in a lot of Celtic tradition to their own modalities. So really, there were 2 festivals that were originated in the Roman modality that were combined with traditional Celtic celebrations of Samhain. And so this is how Samhain just kind of got reincarnated. So even the Romans that came in, and you got to remember the Romans in history, they would come in, they would conquer a land, and then they would borrow anything that kind of worked with their own mythology or their own modality. Or they would borrow religious attributes that made the masses happy as long as they would just keep paying taxes. But a lot of times the Romans were kind of lazy, and so they would sort of fold in local traditions with whatever worked for them. That was just what they did. And so they had these traditions that they had, and one was called Feralia, and it was a day in kind of late October-ish when the Romans commemorated the passing of the dead, right? So they were already celebrating in 43 AD, and the 400 years past that, they were already celebrating Feralia, which was the passing of the dead. And then they all of a sudden happen upon Samhain, which is huge for the Druids, and they're telling futures and burning 2-story tall bonfires. And it's like, the Romans love to party, right? So they're watching this going, well, we need the Samhain, not the Feralia, because the Samhain is really where the party is. So that got folded in. And the second day that they used to honor the dead in Rome was called Pomona. And that was a Roman goddess, by the way, of fruit and trees. Don't ask me why fruit and trees have to do with honoring the dead, but they did. So the symbol of Pomona is the apple, okay? And the incorporation of this Pomona big hootenanny celebration into Samhain is likely where we got the bobbing for apples stuff and this whole apple concept. Because again, not real sure what the Romans were thinking with fruit trees and apples, but this commemorated the dead. And so there we get Samhain and apples, which is kind of interesting. You know, what's so fascinating about this is that we never let go in Christianity of this Day of the Dead thing. Because in the heart of every human being on the planet in the Northern Hemisphere, everybody, and probably in the Southern Hemisphere in their own time, but I live in the North, so, you know, King of the North. We're going to talk about that. One of the things is that with the North, okay, even no matter what religious affiliation you were, if you were a Druid, if you were another Celtic ancient earth religion or polytheistic society, or the Romans were polytheists. They didn't believe in one God way back in the day until the Roman Catholic Church took over. Then it all got smushed down to the one very angry God. Very angry, very judgy, very powerful, angry God. So really, if we're going into the Catholicism in Rome, so we speed forward from 43 AD to maybe 600, 618, 1980, right in there. 600 years. We'll throw that at the wall. And the Pope Boniface IV dedicated the Pantheon in Rome. And the Pantheon, you have to remember, the Pantheon still stands in Rome. And the Pantheon, it still is, a majestic giant dome built out of pumice, so it could hold its own weight, that celebrated all of the gods. So even when Rome was being sacked, even when there were big wars with the Saxons, even when bad things were going on, none of the opposing forces to Rome ever touched the Pantheon, because other world religions believed in their gods, and this structure was so magnificent that they thought, oh my God, if I sack that thing, I'm going to have all these 12 Roman gods after me. And remember, the Romans borrowed their gods from Greece because the Romans love to recycle. They're Italian. They don't want to work super hard at something. They just want to make something super fabulous out of something that pre-exists, like leather. So pretty much they borrowed their gods from Greece. And so a lot of these sacking places and cultures, they acknowledged that the Pantheon was a holy place and they let it stand. So the Pantheon was still around when the Catholic Church took it over. And the Catholic Church was not going to knock down the Pantheon because they realized that globally at the time, what they saw as the globe, the world they knew saw the Pantheon as a power structure, right? So the Catholic Church took over the Pantheon and took out, there's all these little alcoves in the Pantheon where there were these amazing carved marble statues of all the Roman gods. So, of course, the church took out the statues and replaced it with saints and Jesus and Mary and the Stations of the Cross and all these things. But anyway, so you got Pope Boniface IV dedicated that Pantheon to honor all of the Christian martyrs, and replace the statues out, and then put the Catholic Feast of All Martyrs Day over the top of Samhain and over the top of Pomona and over the top of these Roman holidays. And so All Martyrs Day really was established by that westernized church, and Pope Gregory III, he later expanded this festival to include all these saints and all martyrs and stretched it out because they were getting a lot of donations. They were getting a lot of grain donations, a lot of food donations. So good old, Pope Gregory wasn't stupid. So he's like, why are we doing this on one day? Why are we doing this November 1st? This is stupid. He stretched the holiday from May to November so that people could come in and observe the dead and the martyrs and keep giving money and keep giving goodies. And they drop it off at the Pantheon and it was all good. So now we're like really scooting forward on Halloween here. So it goes from this really ancient wooded thing with 2-story tall bonfires and people wearing animal skins and divinating for one another and reading the future. And it was such a big deal about the mysticism and who could see the future during this time, to now we've commercialized the heck out of it and the church owns it and we're taking donations in, okay? So basically by the 9th century, and Christianity is spread all over the place through lots of wars and you will be Christian or we'll kill you kind of modalities. Oh my goodness, proselytization through the sword is so interesting. So there's Christianity, right? And really it's Christianity ate up all the old world religions, or a lot of them, in the Celtic regions. And it blended in and supplanted the older Celtic rites. It took them over. And so in 1000 AD, so we're going forward 3,000 years here, okay, from the 2,000 years BC, here we go. The church, they took November 2nd because they didn't want to be right on top of Samhain because that's the devil's day, don't you know? So they took November 2nd and they made it All Souls Day and they decided to honor the dead. But don't you think it's weird that even though these different modalities are taking over this holiday, all humans are recognizing that there's something going on at the end of October, beginning of November, where the ethers are just super duper thin. I mean, the popes are recognizing it. Rome is recognizing it. They don't want to call it, hey, let's do the Druid thing because that's going to, of course, piss off Jesus, right? According to the Catholic Church back of the day. Yet they are still recognizing as a biological human unit on this earth that something is going on with these ethers in spite of the doctrine, in spite of the mysticism, in spite of the soothsaying and future telling, which you have to remember was a big fat no-no and still is with a lot of Christian religions. So pretty much, you go forward 1000 AD and the church made November 2nd. They just decided to make it All Souls Day and they're honoring the dead. And right there, they were really attempting to just stamp out for the last time that Celtic Festival of the Dead with an official church-related holiday that just erased Samhain altogether. So this is what they're trying to do. And honestly, this is where it gets weird, though. This is where the co-opting of the holiday gets super creepy. So we're 1,000 years AD, and if you add that to 2,000 years BC, that's 3,000 years time frame. And now the church is deciding to go forward and really adopt all the stuff that worked that made Samhain so fabulous. Because remember, they are the Romans. I know they're the church, but it is Italy. It's nice. What do you do for your festival? We get more people if we put a bonfire. It rages to the, I don't know, it's a several stories tall. We make a big bonfire. We give them more people. They give them more money. We eat them more pasta. We make a big time. Come. Okay, so this is pretty much what happens. And the All Saints' Day celebration was also called, and this is where we start to get this, All Hallows or All Hallowmas. And this is from the Middle English All Hallowmis, meaning All Saints' Day, okay? So this is a Middle English word this is where we get All Hallows' Day. And the night before, which of course remembering, this was now November 2nd, the night before the traditional night of, it was Samhain, which would have been November 1st in the Celtic religion, that began to be called All Hallows' Eve and eventually Halloween. And they started doing the big bonfires and parades and dressing up in costumes as saints and angels and devils. So Rome pretty much figured out again that the big party was around the big bonfire. So go out into the woods, light those big bonfires and dress up like devils, but also dress up like saints and angels. Let's not be too imbalanced, right? Let's not piss off Jesus. So everybody's out there having a great time, but we're still having it on Samhain. We're still having it when the Druids determined that the ethers were the most thin. Okay, so thank you, Druids, for noticing this. And then, of course, Halloween or All Hallows' Eve, as it came to be known, jumps to America. And the celebration of Halloween really was not a thing in colonial New England at first because they were so uptight. You have to remember they were super psycho-religious people who were kicked out of England for being so creepy that the king didn't even want them around. He shoved them on boats, hoped they die of scurvy, and shoved them across the Atlantic, figuring if they lived, that would be the biggest plight of all. So we were a country that were founded on extremists, religious extremists that scared the crap out of England because they were willing to die for their cause. And they realized right away that they needed to get these people out of there because they weren't afraid of the crown. They were only afraid of God, a big angry God, a mean, white, angry male God. They were very afraid of this God. So anyway, you got to understand that Halloween was not a biggie at first in the new colonial England because the Puritan and Protestant, and I can't even call them Protestants. They were so radical. Belief systems were off the hook. So really where you found Halloween was when you got down south a little bit, like around Maryland and the southern colonies, and it doesn't surprise me they put D.C., right in the corner there by Maryland. They're like, we're going to take this devil's pit and send it south when we form this country. It is not coming up here to where our Puritan butts hit the rock in the boat. We're not doing that. So basically, the beliefs and the customs in America were blending like mad. And all of these European ethnic groups and American Indians meshed together. And a distinctly version of Halloween that was American began to emerge. And it began to be fun because in America, just like how Rome co-opted everything and for profit to make it more fabulous and you pay the Don basically with taxes and all the things, America loved to make things fun. We co-opted everything and made it fun and happy and light and let's party and woo. So that's where we first started to get these parties, Halloween parties. And they were public events and they celebrated the harvest and we bobbed for apples and we made it a good time. And then neighbors would still share stories of their dead folks and tell each other's fortunes and they'd dance and sing and have a good time. So there was a little mysticism brought over because the mysticism was coming over with the Irish immigrants in the potato famines. So even though, the religion tried to stamp it out in another continent, in another country, in another time, this is important to note, still the humans in America were like, but wait a minute, we should tell each other's fortunes and we should talk to the dead. That seems right. Even though this holiday kept trying to get overridden and the mysticism kept trying to get stamped out of it over and over again. So the colonial Halloween festivities, they told ghost stories and they played pranks on each other. And by the middle of the 19th century, so you got to remember what is that? I never get this right. The 20th century is the 1900s. So the 19th century is the 1800s. God, I hate that. So by the middle of the 1800s, there were normal autumn festivities that were happening all over the place. Yet, really, Halloween wasn't celebrated all over the place. It was celebrated in this one space that was absorbing most of the immigrants coming in on the coast over there. And so it was the second half of the 18th century where we really had a lot more immigrants coming in. And they were, again, lots of Irish with the potato famine coming in. And they really helped to popularize Halloween on a national level because that was cultural for them as Celtic people. So, really, the trick-or-treating really didn't happen until later. And that's when, because we had this influx of all these amazing immigrants coming into our country, they started dressing up for Halloween. We started dressing up for Halloween. And then folks would go to, house to house. They would trick-or-treat, basically, asking for food or money. And that was just a party thing. Like everybody decided, when you're in the street and somebody starts a conga line and everybody grabs somebody's hips and they just start the conga line. That's kind of what happened. Like somebody got drunk and started going door to door and saying, hey, let's just go ask people for money and food and show off our costumes. And if they don't give us money or food, then we'll pee on their front step or do something stupid. Drunk people tricks. So that's really what happened. And then we still have the mysticism in the 1800s and young women believed that on Halloween they could divine the name or the way their appearance of their future husbands. And they figured they could do this by doing yarn tricks or doing something with mirrors or bobbing for apples a certain way. So we still are carrying the unique and this united vision of mysticism through these thin ethers all the way through all the crazy religious doorways, sailing across to a different continent. It's still persisting because we as biological beings, gang, we do recognize that something is going on with the ethers this time of year, and we're trying to make sense out of it, okay? So pretty much it was the late 1800s, gang, where America molded Halloween into a holiday that became more commercialized and about community and neighborly get-togethers and ghosts and stuff like that. And we started to kind of shove the witchcraft and the divination aside right about there. And those Halloween parties, they became kid-friendly and adults became really excited about costumes and it became about the games. And it was about that time, too, that society, especially parents, were encouraged by newspapers and the media of the day to really take anything scary out of Halloween or grotesque out of it, really because they wanted to make it more of a community event. And so Halloween lost around the late 1800s a lot of its superstitious stuff, like tell the future and divine the gods and talk to the dead. And it began to get really commercial. And it really started to lose the religious overtones also by the beginning of the 20th century. So pretty much by the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s, Halloween had just become this fun thing that you do. You dress up, you go get drunk, you go dance, you show people your costumes, you get fabulous. And it was parades and town. That's what we do in America. We took all the meaning out and we made it a massive party and a holiday. Okay? We're worse than Rome. At least Rome kept some of the meaning. America took it all out just to make it this surface level get together to see whose costume was prettiest. Welcome to the United States. So, that's really when a lot of vandalism started. And by the 50s, they got the vandalism out of Halloween. And between really 1920 and 1950, trick-or-treating started up again. And it was the way that the communities would get together. And that was really an American tradition, this whole trick-or-treating thing. So Halloween, here we are today. And Americans, gang, have you ever seen the Halloween store? My kid loves the Halloween store. She loves it. She will go there a couple of times a month during this time of year. She's also a cosplayer. But anyway, really, it's important for you to know that Americans spend an estimated $6 billion annually on Halloween. And it's really our second largest commercial holiday after Christmas. So that's kind of where we've gone. We've gone from Samhain, thousands and thousands of years ago, where the Druids understood that we could talk to the dead during this period because the ethers are thin. Then it got co-opted by Rome, and then it got co-opted by the Roman Catholic Church, and then it got co-opted by American consumerism, and here we are with Halloween. However, here is the most important thing of all, and the most spooky thing of all. Now till the end of October, if you light some candles, and you turn off all your electronic devices, and you listen quietly in your house, you will hear different ticks and pops and footsteps. You will hear cabinets opening when they shouldn't. You will hear mystical sounds from your basement. You will hear little scratches in between the walls, because this is the thin ether time that has been recognized by our spiritual brothers and sisters for thousands of years. So whatever your affiliation is with the spirit realm, light your candles and prepare for a frightening time. And also prepare to be enlightened by messages from the other side, inspirations, life path identities that you didn't know could exist that are brought to us courtesy of the other side. And I will see you next podcast.